It's July 7th, 2023. I took, well, in fact, this morning I watched The General's Daughter. Came out in 1999. John Travolta's in it. He's like one of the leading actors. Um, and I watched it very interestingly with a keen ear to some of the name references that they use to just make sure that I frame it in context correctly, not to get caught up in any fanciful other possibilities or net of problematic whatever. So, so there was that. Then all three generations that are inside this particular residence with me. We went to a state park today in New York. Well, it's Jones Beach. It's within the state park system of here. Lewis took Linda, myself, and my Mayan calendar baby, the 2012, to Jones Beach, and so we had a nice family outing. And then I'm coming home, and I made an appointment with one of the local neurologists, but it's not until September, and it's more for the decrease in motor function or agility. I have like this intracranial pressure that seems to come and go, and it puts some pressure on my optic nerve. And I'm just passing a year anniversary since that weird acute anemia event happened, where just overnight I just all of a sudden needed a blood transfusion. Nobody knows, or nobody's given me any reason why. And so I'm just kind of keeping an eye on some of these health effects. And so I've also noticed, so there's something, and I'm not as sharp as I normally am. I'm watching some of these news programs. This one is Elizabeth Vargas reports on News Nation. She had a very interesting thing, something about PFAS, which again, like, it's almost like they broadcast these things in some kind of medical codex, like CODEX, which I don't really have the correct translation for, the transcription for. And I don't know how to make it relatable to my interior residents, but I'm keeping just an ear out for it, especially considering I've already documented there's some kind of oily substance in the water in the residence. It's not always, but it comes and goes, and it's not the kind of thing that can get boiled out. But it's at the same time, I'm having a little bit of fogginess, as is my mother. And so I'm kind of just keeping an eye on it. So there's that. And then Dr. John LaPook went over this morning on CBS Mornings, something about a new Alzheimer's drug coming out. And he mentions that there's some kind of plaque, which I've never heard of. He says it at the table to the other, like, reporters. He throws it out there, like, do you remember this? And I'm like sitting at home, and I'm like, yeah, I've never heard of that before. I mean, like, again, he's on like cutting edge medical conversations. I'm at local community college conversation, just in order to know how the physiology functions normally. So if there is a disruption, one can describe where they feel the disruption in metabolic is. Um, so this is what the water report looked like.
Be consuming potentially harmful chemicals if you drink tap water. According to a new study from the U.S. Geological Survey, nearly half of the tap water in the U.S. contains forever chemicals. Scientists say these chemicals are linked to high cholesterol, obesity, thyroid disease, and even cancer. And now some environmental groups are calling for regulations on drinking water to monitor the chemicals. Joining us now is the study's lead author and research hydrologist, Kelly Smalling, and professor of we'll skip that, in toxicology at East Carolina University, Jamie DeWitt. Jamie, Kelly, thank you both for being here. Kelly, I'd love to start with you. Would you mind outlining your findings and sharing what surprised you most?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So again, you started with it. 45% of U.S. tap water is estimated to have at least one PFAS. What this study showed was that we spent a lot of time focused on private wells and comparing those to public supply. Private wells in the U.S. are not regulated, and they tend to be monitored based on the homeowner's discretion. So let's just say there's about 40 million people on private wells. So about 13% of the country may not have information about their drinking water quality. So the fact that we found similar concentrations between private wells and public supplies, I think is really important because it gives private well owners some information that they didn't have a couple of weeks ago.
So Jamie, what can be done to mitigate the risks of these forever chemicals in drinking water?
Well, if you're on a private well, then the responsibility will often fall to you, the homeowner, because private wells don't experience the same level of protection or regulation that public utilities are afforded. If you get your water from a public utility, you can be assured that they will be implementing technologies to reduce levels of PFAS if the US EPA proposed maximum contaminant levels are actually put into law. But homeowners can put in filtration systems in their home that will help to reduce the levels of some PFAS in their tap water.
So, Kelly, what is next for your research after uncovering these findings, and what alarms you the most?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. The USGS has been conducting this type of tap water research since 2016. A lot of our studies are community-based, and we work with our partners to answer questions specifically related to their drinking water quality. We have been doing PFAS in that drinking water since 2016. And so what's next? We're going to continue to work with community partners. We're going to continue to work with private well users, and we're going to continue to work with rural communities where information on drinking water quality is limited.
And Jamie, is there anything being done to regulate tap water right now?
As I mentioned, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has proposed maximum contaminant levels or regulatory limits on 6 individual PFAS chemicals. If these are passed, then they would be enforced and enforceable and would give states and municipalities access to some funds to implement technologies to reduce those PFAS and hopefully more in our drinking water supply.
All right, Jamie, professor of pharmacology. I apologize for being tongue-tied there. Kelly Smalling, thank you both for joining us. And the head of a Russian mercenary.
So that aired on Thursday, July 6th. Today is Friday, July 7th. And on CBS Mornings, episode 135 this morning. So that was just something that's kind of been playing in the back of my head that I've been documenting in watching the oil within the water, boiling it, that kind of thing, using the filtration systems that are available in the area, not knowing, but my health deteriorating, and I've just been documenting it, and I don't really been going to what's available in healthcare systems, but it just seems to be getting worse. And so now I'm segueing from that, which has been something that's been a concern of mine, and now it seems like to have been somewhat validated the in the news, to some other conversation, almost as a voyeur in a way, of watching this talk of the table that they're having with John LaPook, who is more at like a who's who, or like an NIH, or like a more tapped into that level of research, development, conversation. And he says something really key, because I know in my observation here in New York, um, I've been blocked from entering. I mean, again, it's almost like these obstacles and barriers were put up so I couldn't enter the field of nursing, or just made it incredibly difficult. And I know what was being hired through different agencies and things. They said there was a nursing shortage, and all of a sudden there wasn't. I mean, there's been like a whole lot of, it seems like, bureaucratic nonsense on Long Island. Um, so I look at it a little differently. And then to see all of this illegal migration, or what I feel is illegal migration, through potential weaknesses like the American College Board of medical degrees, like people trying to enter through that pathway in order to gain medical license and practice inside the US, which I don't know who's regulating or watching over that. But it seems really crucially important, with some of the other local stuff I've seen going on, and some of the stuff that they've touched on in the news. And then they also touched on spying. And now that they have these colleges and integrated medical systems, I mean, like, it poses for me potential fights and problems. And it's just, I mean, I sit here in my quiet and I think on it, and I'm just making a note for my own care and for my children's care at this moment.
Additional months free from worsening symptoms. That would be a very big deal. We spoke with 79-year-old Susie Mitchell, who's had 4 infusions so far and is hopeful that it is stopping further memory loss.
I watched my parents, slide down the pathway of old age, and it wasn't pretty. I don't want to be pushed aside. I want to be an active player in my life.
Didn't I say? Our chief medical correspondent, John LaPook, joins us now. John, first approval, full approval. Who could qualify for this? Who might benefit?
So important to emphasize, these are people with early dementia, early Alzheimer's. So it's not for the people who have advanced disease.
So how do you define early?
Well, early is just, they have mild cognitive impairment. There are ways that you can test for that, but they also have to have evidence of amyloid in their brains, and either by a PET scan, which is a brain scan, or by a blood test or spine.
Amyloid is not a household word. It was not a word that was taught. I've heard the word plaque, when they talk like ventricular, or like cardiac. I've heard of plaques. I've heard of plaque on the brain, but like not, this is where they're actually categorizing it into a new word. I suppose it's with FDA approval for this drug that they're now going to come out with. But I have never heard of this amyloid before.
spinal fluid.
Okay.
And remember that amyloid is that gooey substance that goes on top of the brain, and it interrupts the way that nerves can talk to each other. You need to have that for the definition diagnosis of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
But your question was, how do you?
So who can now qualify for it? That's
Early, and they have to have also. It has to be early.
And
Early,
how
yeah.
well is 27% reduction in memory loss? How significant is that?
Well, it translates for an 18-month trial, and in that trial, it looked like it gave you about a 5 to 6 month slowing of the denigration of your mental status, right? So it slowed the loss of cognitive function by about 6 months, 5 or 6 months. Now, that's a big deal for somebody who can have even one more day of being able to enjoy your family and not have the fog of dementia around.
For the family too, they enjoy
family.
that
And
person.
remember, when one person has Alzheimer's, a whole bunch of people have.
It affects many people.
are-
Yeah. Honestly, it is one of my biggest fears. Every time I forget something, you go, uh-oh, is this it?
Now, like, I heard that as a cluster group, but again, I know what he means in more of like a cascading domino effect, because when one of the key pieces of a family unit is suffering from something, then it affects others within that unit.
Is this it?
Yeah.
I mean, and so why does this one seem to work when others have not?
Right, that is the $1 million question. I think one thing is that it's been given these drugs that sop up amyloid too late, probably. Imagine that somebody's had 5 heart attacks, they're in heart failure, and then you say, well, let's lower your cholesterol. You have to give it early, before all the damage is done, and the changes and the damage in the brain with Alzheimer's occur maybe decades before people have symptoms. So in this case, you're starting much earlier. But there's another thing, which is, and this is very technical, I'll say it sort of very simply, the type of antibody that lecanemab is, it affects and removes plaque that's already formed, but also it prevents plaque from forming in the brain.
Okay, so that was my next question. When I hear about breakthroughs like this, I think like an athlete. You know, preventative rehab is what they would tell us, so we didn't get injured. We try to protect an injury from happening. So can this prevent this from happening as you get older?
Yeah, and should we take it in our 40s? I mean, why wait?
I think that's where we're headed. So I spoke to Risa Sperling, who's a wonderful researcher up at Harvard yesterday about this. And I asked that very same question. She said, yeah, I'm doing a study right now of people with no symptoms at all, but they have evidence of amyloid on either a spinal fluid or a blood test or a brain scan or something like that, and to see if giving them lecanemab now or a medication like it might prevent Alzheimer's. So I think in the future where we're headed is a cocktail of medication. This is sort of just my sort of impression from having followed this for so long, where you have maybe different types of amyloid by different types of drugs, but also maybe a drug that affects tau, which is another abnormal protein that's inside cells, and maybe another one that decreases inflammation in the brain. So all those together and as early as possible.
Somebody told me once years ago, because, you know, whenever you forget something like your keys, they said everybody does that, regardless of your age. What you need to worry is when you can't remember what a key is. That's when you have to pay attention. So when I hear about drugs like this, it makes me very excited, and I'm thinking, should we start taking it now? But what are the side effects? You always hear about side effects with different drugs.
Yeah, there are side effects. I mean, the biggest one
Like?
here was brain swelling and bleeding.
Well, that ain't good.
Well, but usually it was without symptoms. It's something that has to be followed very closely. There were some very serious side effects in terms of the bleeding. But again, it's going to be weighing risk and benefit. And I think these are going to be long discussions with patients. It's going to take time. The Medicare is going to cover it. It's more than $26,000 a year, but still, 20% copay plus the cost of going to the infusion centers. There may be an equity issue
So John,
here.
is brain bleeding worth of it?
And so, and my whole thing is that I listen to this, and because there's this other thing going on with spying and whatever, and News Nation put on something called The Hill, which I'm gonna reference after this, because I'm thinking to myself, now that they've opened these domestic interior research facilities in the U.S., and they've been allowing through this American College of Medicine these other countrymen to come in and to do these research and to learn here and be part of the system. I mean, again, I'm just trying to focus in on when is this conversation about spying actually relevant, and where does that fit in to day-to-day life? And there is that component of like correlation. So I'm going to pause this for 1 second. So this is something called The Hill, and it's E105, and it was on News Nation on Thursday, July 6th.
All right, welcome back. The Pentagon is now cracking down on Chinese influence and Russian spy operations at U.S. colleges and universities. There's reportedly more than 80 Chinese and Russian institutions participating in spying activities, which include sharing classified U.S. research. Pentagon spokesperson.
And I'm trying to find, the medical community is one area of potential whatever. And then, of course, the technology labs that they've opened up with teaching people how to program. And I don't even know what industry that is, but these tech firms that teach kids how to code things and decode things and then break into other people's terminals. And then, the cybersecurity aspect of it. And then wherever cybersecurity jumps into your secured home network, if you've had any energy disturbances, like biologically or physiologically. Again, that's more of like an omnisphere. I call it the sphere in between, just so there's a word for it.
Spokesperson Brigadier General Pat Ryder addressed China's involvement earlier today during a press briefing. Listen here.
The Confucius Institute U.S. Center is a foreign mission of the People's Republic of China, recognizing it as an entity advancing Beijing's global propaganda and malign influence campaign on U.S. campuses and K-12 classrooms. Our national defense strategy makes that very clear. We view them as a competitor and they're a pacing challenge.
Joining us now to talk about the national security implications is the former CIA officer, former FBI special agent, and News Nation national security contributor, Tracy Walder. Tracy, good to talk to you as always. When you think about the global space, right? We've had warfare forever, air, land, and sea, or not forever, but for a very long time. Last couple decades, it's moved into cyber warfare. Is this a new phase of which I guess you could call academic warfare?
It's great to see you, Blake. Thank you for having me. I'm not sure that this is a new phase. Really, when I worked at the FBI in the early 2000s, this is something that we were investigating. I'm glad that it's getting attention that I think it needs now, quite frankly, because it really wasn't at the time.
Why did it take so long then? If you were dealing with this 20 years ago, why are we hearing about it now?
That's a good question too. I think part of the issue is legitimately September 11th had also happened. So we were sort of in the wake of that. And we were very focused on this counterterrorism mission, which we should be. I worked that at the CIA. But the problem is sometimes in the United States, we get very singular on these issues that we focus on, and we need to take a bit of a broader approach to it. And so I think that probably was part of the issue.
The schools, the actual schools,
Here in New York, there were several back to back. There was the Y2K issue at the turn of the century, and then there was 9/11 happened right after that.
There was someone from Harvard who was arrested, right? The premier institution in this country. But there's a lot more than Harvard. Thousands all across the country. Do they have the wherewithal to handle this and to look into this?
Yes and no. So we're looking at schools like Cornell, Harvard, Northwestern, UCLA, right? This has all been the subject of an investigation really that started in 2018, and about 60 universities were identified as having these issues. And so I think part of the problem is that these schools, they're not part of our national security apparatus, nor am I saying that they should be, but they do take a different approach in terms of research and in terms of schooling. And really, schools should be open. They should be a place of learning. And so what you're having here is this issue of marrying this freedom to, learn, quite frankly, with the idea that our national security could be compromised. And so we need to take sort of a dual-edged approach in dealing with this, because it is problematic. A lot of folks don't get into academia to enforce national security, and that's problematic.
Tracy, Bob Cusack with The Hill. I don't want to be flip about this, but at the same time, we do a lot of spying. What is the difference between Russia and China and what we do?
You know, Bob, I don't think you're being flip at all. I've actually said it myself. I've said this when we talked about the Chinese spy balloon and all of those things. We spy too. We know this. Edward Snowden leaked all of that information, quite frankly, about the things that we were doing with foreign governments. But the thing is look, it was my job in the CIA.
I've heard this name, Snowden, but it's like hearing that Cuomo was governor. It's like hearing that Adams is in the New York City mayor's office. I have no idea what it really means. Like, there's no definition to it. There's no teachings of it. It happened. But there's no real, like, connection necessarily to it from where I am.
The CIA and my job in the FBI to protect our national security information. So really, we don't do anything different. However, my goal is to always keep our academic research, which quite frankly costs taxpayer dollars if all of that information is compromised and then stolen and given to another country. And so I do think that it is something that needs to be kept secret, and it is something that we have a duty to protect and keep secret. So it really is no different, but we want to keep our information secure, just as I'm sure China and other countries are doing as well.
Hey, Tracy, I got like 20 seconds left, but real quick, can Congress do anything about this?
Well, look, we do have Proclamation 10043, and that is something that Trump passed back in 2020, and that really suspended student visas on folks from China. I'm not sure that that's the best idea, but one of the things I think we need to do is reach out to academic institutions and help them be better stewards of national security information.
Tracy, if you can pull Proclamation 10043 out of your back pocket like that, that means you know your stuff. That's pretty impressive. Good to hear your opinion. Good to hear your take. Have a good one. We'll catch you next time, Tracy. Thank you. Well, coming up, the panelists and I will share what caught our eye today.
Now, I thought this was really interesting on the same CBS this morning's episode from 7/7/2023.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is in Beijing, where she's warning China to put an end to what she calls unfair economic practices. Yellen spent the day hearing from American businesses in China. Elizabeth Palmer has more from the Chinese capital.
Her message to company representatives, including from Boeing and Bank of America: we know it hasn't been an easy time for you.
I've been particularly troubled by punitive actions that have been taken against U.S. firms in recent months.
That's a reference to raids this spring by police on 3 companies the Chinese government, without offering solid evidence, said were suspected of spying. But in spite of this friction and a chilly Beijing-Washington relationship, U.S.-China trade is booming. It reached an all-time high last year. Everything from iPhones to solar panels to soybeans, worth an eye-watering almost $700 billion. It's crucial to both countries. As the secretary told the second most powerful man in China this afternoon, Premier Li Qiang, it needs protecting.
But we should not allow any disagreement to lead to misunderstandings that needlessly worsen our bilateral economic and financial relationships.
The premier, who knows Yellen from previous meetings, seemed in a receptive mood. In his welcoming remarks, he said, the U.S. and China would surely see more rainbows after going through the wind and rain. The goal of this trip is to pave the way for more talks. But in spite of the cordial formalities, Yellen has a tough line to deliver, too.
We believe that.
And that is that America is not prepared to back down on some of the things that China is most angry about, notably export controls that would block the sale to China of some of the most sophisticated chip technology with perhaps military applications on national security grounds. Nate?
This portion of CBS 2 News is sponsored.
So that's kind of the compilation. My concerns about the interior handling of some of the medical information, some of the way that the schools are being set up, some of the way that the private sector is funding the public research. These things are really concerning for me, especially with the way I've almost just been like, I mean, I have clock purpose at like astronomer clock with whatever goes on there. So I'm not even able to get to that level, or I haven't been able to get to that level of conversation with anybody 6 foot over in since a long, long time. I seem to be stuck in the 6 foot under crowd, and I don't understand why. But I'm fortunate that at least I'm with the 3 generations at the moment. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza. It's Earth, Solar System, Milky Way, Universe, Galaxy is broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.